Night of my granddaughter's graduation party, I was sitting in my car in the driveway of the house I helped pay for, staring at the front door like a stranger. Not like a grandmother. Not like the woman who had written a check for $73,000 so my daughter and her husband could afford the down payment 6 years ago. Just like someone who had shown up at the wrong address. The lights inside were warm. I could hear music, something upbeat, celebratory, and the faint sound of children laughing. Through the sheer curtain on the side window, I could see silhouettes moving, people holding drinks. A banner, probably. Balloons, almost certainly. I had driven 40 minutes to get there. I sat in that car for 11 minutes before I started the engine and drove home. Let me start from the beginning. My daughter's name is Vivian. She's 38 years old. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, though she would never admit to the second part. Her husband is a man named Cole, tall, quiet in a way that I used to think was thoughtful and later understood was just calculated. They have 2 children, a boy named Eli and a girl named Paige, who had just graduated from 8th grade that Saturday in June. Paige's graduation. That was the occasion. I had known about the party for 6 weeks. Vivian had mentioned it in passing during one of our Sunday phone calls, the ones that had gotten shorter over the years, shrinking from an hour to 40 minutes to now sometimes barely 20. She said they were planning something small. Backyard. Just family and a few of Paige's friends. I said it sounded lovely. I asked if I could bring anything. She said she'd let me know. She never let me know. The Thursday before the party, she called me. Not a text, an actual call, which I remember thinking was unusual. She called around 7 in the evening while I was making dinner, and I turned down the stove and sat at the kitchen table because something in her voice made me feel like I should be sitting down. She said, "Mom, about Saturday, I just wanted to let you know. It's going to be pretty much Cole's family this time. His parents, his brother's family. It'll be a lot of people, and the backyard isn't that big. And we just thought it would be easier to keep it simple." I didn't say anything for a moment. She said, "I hope you understand." I said, "She's my granddaughter, Vivian." There was a pause. Then she said, "I know, Mom. We'll do something with you separately. Maybe take her to lunch next week. Lunch next week. Not the party. Not the banner and the balloons and the people holding drinks. Lunch. Next week. Like a consolation prize wrapped in good intentions." I said okay. I said I understood. I said to tell Paige I loved her and was proud of her. After I hung up, I sat at that kitchen table for a long time without moving. The pasta on the stove overcooked. I didn't eat that night. I need to tell you about the money because without the money the story doesn't make sense. Or maybe it makes too much sense. My late husband passed 11 years ago. Prostate cancer, diagnosed late, gone within 14 months. He was 61. I was 58. We had been married for 34 years. After the funeral, after the paperwork and the grief and the slow, quiet process of becoming a person who lives alone, I found myself in a position I hadn't expected. Howard had been careful with money, more careful than I ever gave him credit for. There was life insurance. There was his pension. There were investments I hadn't known the details of because he handled all of that, and I had trusted him completely, which I do not regret because he earned that trust every single day of our marriage. I was not rich, but I was stable. And I was 68 years old with a paid-off house in Columbus, Ohio, and more in savings than I had any immediate need for. Vivian and Cole had been renting at the time. They had 1 child, Eli, and Paige was on the way. Cole worked in logistics management. Vivian worked part-time as a dental hygienist. They were not struggling exactly, but they were stretched thin, and the Columbus housing market was not being kind to people trying to buy their first home. I offered to help. I want to be precise about this. I offered. Vivian did not ask. I brought it up on my own because I had the means to help, and she was my daughter, and I wanted her children to grow up in a home, not an apartment. Cole accepted before Vivian even finished processing what I'd said. $73,000. That was my contribution to their down payment on a 4-bedroom house in Westerville. I did not ask for it back. I did not write up a loan agreement. I gave it the way I thought parents were supposed to give, without strings, without expectation, because you love your children and you want good things for them. That was 6 years ago. In those 6 years, Vivian and I had grown incrementally, almost imperceptibly, further apart. The Sunday calls got shorter. The holiday visits felt more obligated than warm. Cole had never been particularly welcoming toward me. Polite, yes, but with a politeness that felt like a wall rather than a door. I told myself this was normal, that families ebb and flow, that I didn't want to be one of those mothers-in-law who caused problems. So I stayed quiet. I stayed small. I brought casseroles when they were busy. I babysat when they asked. I sent birthday cards with checks inside that were cashed without acknowledgement. And I told myself everything was fine. The morning after Vivian's phone call, I woke up with something unfamiliar sitting in my chest. Not quite sadness, not quite anger, something harder than both. I got up, made coffee, and sat by the window that looks out onto my backyard. The garden I've kept for 20 years. The rose bushes Howard planted the spring before he got sick. And I thought very clearly and very carefully about the last 6 years. About the Sunday calls that were now 15 minutes if I was lucky. About the Christmas 2 years ago when Cole's parents flew in and I was told there wasn't room for me at the table. They had a full house, and could I maybe come for dessert? I came for dessert. I sat on the edge of a folding chair in the living room while his family laughed at inside jokes I didn't know, and I ate a piece of pie and drove home. About last Thanksgiving, when I wasn't invited at all, Vivian said they were doing just the 4 of them that year, needing some quiet family time. I ate Thanksgiving dinner alone at my kitchen table watching the parade on television. About the fact that I had not been inside that house in Westerville, the house I helped buy, in over 8 months, and now Paige's graduation. My granddaughter, 8th grade, a milestone I would not be present for. I picked up my phone. I did not call Vivian. I called my friend Roberta, who has been my closest friend for 27 years and who does not sugarcoat things, which is exactly why I needed her. Roberta listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lorraine, when are you going to stop making it easy for them to treat you this way?" I didn't have an answer. She said, "You gave them $73,000. You babysit when they need you. You show up with food and you send money and you make yourself small and they still leave you out of your own granddaughter's party. What exactly are you waiting for?" I said I didn't know. She said, "Call an attorney." I said, "Roberta, I'm not going to sue my daughter." She said, "I didn't say sue her. I said talk to someone who can tell you what your options are. Because right now you're just sitting there hurting and you're not doing anything about it. And that's not like you. Or it didn't used to be." That last sentence stayed with me. I did not go to the party. I did what I said. I sat in the car for 11 minutes, looking at the lights in the windows, and then I drove home. I don't know what I had been hoping for. Maybe that Vivian would look out and see my car and come to the door. Maybe that some version of my daughter who remembered she had a mother would appear. No one came to the door. On the way home, I stopped at a gas station and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, because I was crying and I didn't want to drive while crying. Not the quiet kind of crying, the kind that shakes your whole chest. 64 years old, sitting in a gas station parking lot, crying because my daughter didn't want me at her daughter's party. I gave myself 5 minutes. Then I wiped my face, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home. That night, I made a list. It was the kind of list you make when you finally stop pretending. I wrote down every financial contribution I had made to Vivian and Cole's life since Howard passed. The down payment. The $4,000 I gave them when Cole's car needed a new transmission and they were between paychecks. The $2,200 for Eli's braces when their dental coverage fell short. The check I wrote every year at Christmas, without fail, $500 each. So $1,000 a year for 6 years. The cash I pressed into Vivian's hand on her birthday because I knew they were always a little stretched in January. I added it up. Between the down payment and everything else, I had given them just over $89,000 in 6 years. I looked at that number for a long time. Then I went to bed, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I slept without waking up in the middle of the night. Monday morning, I called my attorney. His name is Franklin Deere. He handled Howard's estate and has done my will and a few other things over the years. I explained the situation to him, not all of it, just the financial parts and the question I needed answered. Was there any legal avenue available to me regarding the $73,000 down payment contribution? He was careful and honest with me, the way good attorneys are. He said that because I had given the money as a gift, no promissory note, no written agreement, recovery through litigation would be very difficult and probably not worth pursuing. He said if I had any documentation, canceled checks, bank records, I should keep them, but that in his estimation, I should not count on seeing that money returned through the courts. I said I had expected that. Then I asked him the question I had actually called to ask. Could I change my will? He said of course. He said I could do whatever I wanted with my estate. I said I wanted to. We made an appointment for the following Thursday. I also called my financial advisor. Her name is Susan Park, and she's been managing my accounts since Howard passed. I told her I wanted to talk through some things. We met for coffee on Wednesday. I told her what had happened, not all of it, just enough. She listened with the particular kind of focused attention that good financial people have, the kind that doesn't require explanation twice. I told her I was thinking about my house. Howard and I had paid it off completely 7 years ago. It was worth considerably more than we had paid for it. Columbus real estate had been generous to us. I told Susan I was interested in understanding all my options regarding that asset. She walked me through several scenarios. A reverse mortgage if I chose to stay and needed liquidity. A trust structure that would allow me to designate beneficiaries with conditions attached. The option to add or remove heirs from my estate plan entirely. I listened carefully. I asked questions. I took notes on a legal pad the way I used to when I was still teaching. 22 years in the Columbus City Schools, 6th grade language arts. When I got home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. In control. I did not call Vivian. Not that week. Not the week after. She called me once, on a Tuesday evening about 12 days after the party. A short call. She said they'd been busy. She said Paige had loved the party. She said they should set up that lunch we talked about. I said that sounded nice. I did not set up the lunch. I did not send the check I would normally have sent at the end of June, the birthday money for Cole, whose birthday falls on the 22nd. It was not a grand gesture. I just didn't send it. I went to the Thursday appointment with Franklin. I signed new documents. I removed Vivian and Cole's names from the primary beneficiary position on my estate. I restructured things so that my assets, the house, the accounts, the small investment portfolio Howard had built, would go to a combination of charitable remainder trusts and conditional provisions for my grandchildren directly, not through their parents. Paige and Eli would still be in my will. They didn't do anything wrong. They are children, and I love them, and none of this is their doing. But Vivian and Cole would no longer inherit my house. Franklin asked me once gently whether I was sure. He said decisions like this, made in the wake of emotional situations, sometimes look different after time has passed. I said I understood that. I said I had thought about it for 2 weeks, and I wasn't acting out of anger. I said I was acting out of clarity. He nodded and notarized the documents. 3 weeks passed, then 5 weeks. Then, on a Thursday evening in late July, my phone rang. It was Vivian. This time it wasn't a short call. I could hear something different in her voice from the first word, a kind of careful tension that people have when they're trying to say something and also trying not to say it. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. She said she'd been meaning to call. I said I knew. There was a pause. Then she said, Mom, Cole's parents were asking about the holidays, about Thanksgiving. They want to do a big trip this year, a rental house at the lake. His whole family, kids and everything. It would be about 15 people. We were wondering if maybe you wanted to join. I sat with that for a moment. Not Cole's family's idea. Not Vivian's idea, clearly. A 15-person family vacation, and I was being offered a seat at the table. I said, That's very kind. Can I think about it? She said, of course. And then, this is the part I had been waiting for, though I hadn't known it. She said, Mom, are you okay? You seem, I don't know, different lately. I said, different how? She said, I don't know, just quieter. I said, I don't know, just quieter. I said, I've had some time to think. Another pause. Longer this time. She said, about what? I said, about a lot of things, Vivian. About what I want the rest of my life to look like. About what I've given and what I've gotten back. About the fact that I sat in your driveway the night of Paige's party for 11 minutes and then drove home alone. The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thing I had heard in a long time. She said, You came? I said, I did. She said, Mom, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't know. I didn't knock. I sat there and then I left because I didn't feel like I had the right to knock on the door of a house I helped pay for to see my own granddaughter graduate from 8th grade. And I want you to sit with that for a minute before you say anything else. She was quiet. I heard her breathing. Then she said very quietly, I'm sorry. I said, I know. That conversation cracked something open. Not fixed, cracked open. There's a difference. Cracks let light in, but there's still cracks. We talked for almost 2 hours that night, the longest we had talked in years. She cried. I didn't, not on the phone. I had already done my crying in the gas station parking lot and in the kitchen at 2 in the morning and in the car on the way to Franklin's office. I was past the crying part. She said she knew things had gotten distant. She said she felt caught between me and Cole, that Cole found me. And she struggled here, trying to find the word a lot to manage. I told her I appreciated her honesty. I told her that a lot to manage was not something I was willing to be for the rest of my life. I said I had been making myself smaller for 6 years, and the only person who hadn't noticed was me. She asked what I needed. I said I needed to be treated like a member of this family, not as an afterthought, not as a resource to be drawn on when convenient and set aside when not. I said I needed to be at my grandchildren's milestones. I said I needed a seat at the table, a real one, not a folding chair in the corner while Cole's family laughs at their inside jokes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Cole is going to have to hear some of this. I said, yes, he is. She said she would talk to him. I said I would be waiting. I should tell you what I did not tell Vivian that night. I did not tell her about Franklin's office. I did not tell her about the documents I had signed or the restructured estate or the fact that her name was no longer on the primary line of my will. Not because I was hiding it, because it wasn't the point. The point wasn't the money. The point was never the money. The point was never the money. Not really. The money was just the thing that made the hurt visible, the way a bruise turns colors a few days after the impact. The real injury was earlier. It was years of shortened phone calls and folding chairs and being told there wasn't room for me. The $73,000 and the estate planning were just the places where I finally stopped negotiating with myself. I did eventually tell her. About 2 months later, over lunch, the lunch we finally actually had, just the two of us, at a restaurant in Dublin that has been my favorite for years, I told her calmly. I told her the decisions I had made and why. I told her that the house would still be there for Paige and Eli through the trust, and that nothing was permanent, that lives and relationships change and wills can be amended. She looked at me for a long moment across the table. Then she said, You did all that and you didn't tell me. I said, I needed to do it for myself first. She nodded slowly. She didn't argue. Somewhere in those few months, something had shifted in her. Or maybe she had finally seen something she had been avoiding looking at. I don't know what conversations she and Cole had had. I don't know what he said or didn't say. I only know that she showed up to that lunch and she listened. And when I was finished, she reached across the table and held my hand. It has been 8 months since the night of Paige's party. Last month, Vivian called to tell me they were planning Thanksgiving at their house. She said Cole's family would be coming, and she wanted to know if I could come too. Not for dessert, for the whole day. I said yes. I brought the sweet potato casserole that I have been bringing to family holidays for 30 years. Howard's mother's recipe, with the brown sugar and the pecans on top. Paige helped me carry the dish in from the car. She's 14 now and taller than she was in June, and she smells like the same drugstore shampoo she has used since she was 11. And when she hugged me in the driveway, I held on a little longer than usual. Cole was polite to me. Not warm, polite. There is still a wall there. And I am not sure it will ever come down entirely. And I have made peace with that. I am not trying to win a prize. I am trying to live honestly in whatever time I have left. And I am trying to be present for my grandchildren in a way that means something. After dinner, Paige asked me to help her with a school project, something about family history, interviewing a relative from an older generation. We sat at the kitchen table for 45 minutes, and she asked me questions about Howard and about my parents and about what Columbus was like when I was her age. I told her things I hadn't thought about in years. I made her laugh twice. I told her about the time her grandfather got lost trying to drive to a wedding in Cincinnati because he refused to stop and ask for directions, and her grandmother, me, finally grabbed the map out of the glove compartment and navigated us there with 12 minutes to spare. She typed everything into her laptop very seriously, like a little journalist. When I got home that night, I sat in my kitchen, the one with the window looking out at Howard's rose bushes, and I felt something I want to try to describe accurately. Not happiness, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like returning to yourself after a very long time away. I had spent 6 years making myself small, showing up with casseroles, accepting whatever seat I was given, telling myself that was what love looked like, that love was tolerating being set aside. It is not. Love has limits, not because limits are cruel, but because they're honest. Because the people who love us, the ones who truly do, will adjust when they know where the edges are. And the ones who won't, who will always push until you fold, those people need to know the edges exist even if they never intend to honor them. I was 64 years old, and I learned that. Better late, I suppose, than never. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling the way I felt in that gas station parking lot, that hollow, shameful grief of being left out by the people who are supposed to love you most, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to be a whole person. You are allowed to stop making yourself small. You are allowed to take up your own space and your own life in the house that still has your late husband's rose bushes in the back garden. And sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will rise to meet you when you stop moving out of the way. I hope that is true for you. It has started to be true for me. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone who asked me what I learned from all of this. Not in a tidy, wrapped-up way, because life doesn't work like that, but honestly. The way you talk to a friend at a kitchen table late at night when the politeness has worn off. What I learned is that cause and effect don't always show up on the schedule you expect. For 6 years, I kept giving. I kept shrinking. I kept telling myself that staying quiet was the loving thing to do, that making peace meant making myself smaller. And for 6 years, nothing changed, because nothing I was doing gave anyone a reason to change. When we absorb mistreatment without response, we don't teach people to love us better. We teach them that the current arrangement is acceptable. That is not kindness. That is a slow, quiet damage to everyone involved, including yourself. The night I drove home from that driveway, from Paige's party, from the house I helped buy, where no one came to the door, something shifted in me. Not dramatically. Not in a flash. It was quieter than that. It was just the moment I finally stopped arguing with what was true. What was true was that I had confused generosity with surrender. I had given $89,000 in 6 years of showing up with casseroles and folding myself into corners, and I had called it love. Some of it was love, but some of it was fear. Fear of being difficult. Fear of being the kind of mother-in-law people complain about. Fear of losing what little closeness I still had. Fear is a terrible reason to keep giving. It produces nothing good in the person giving or the person receiving. When I walked into Franklin's office and restructured my estate, I wasn't acting out of revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was acting out of the first honest assessment of my own situation I had allowed myself to make in years. I looked at what I had built, the savings, the house, Howard's careful planning, and I thought, this belongs to someone who was present, someone who showed up, and I had not been allowed to show up. That decision required something I had let go quiet over time, my own sense of what I deserved, not in an entitled way, just in the plain, factual way that a person who has given decades of care and tens of thousands of dollars has earned a seat at the table, literally, not a folding chair in the corner, a seat at the actual table. The willingness to act on that, to stop waiting for someone to notice and start doing something, that is what changed things. Not the will itself, not the money. The decision to stop being passive about my own life. Vivian heard something different in me because something different was there. She called it quieter. What she was actually sensing was that I had stopped performing okayness. I had stopped making it easy for things to continue as they were. And here is what I believe now. At 64, sitting by a window with rose bushes in the yard that my husband planted before he knew he was sick, the people who are worth keeping in your life will adjust when they finally understand there are edges. They don't have to be perfect. Vivian is not perfect. I am not perfect. But she came to that once. She held my hand across the table. She is trying. That is what honesty made possible. Not a speech, not an ultimatum, not a dramatic confrontation, just the quiet, firm decision to be a whole person again. If you've been folding yourself up to fit into a space that was never meant to hold you, I hope you hear this. You are allowed to take up room. The people who truly love you will make space, and the ones who won't, well, that tells you something too. Something worth knowing, even if it hurts to know it.